to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramee.
I'm back. I'm Kevin Laramee. Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One with Mark Dailey as well. Mark, I want to start the show by saying thank you for holding the fort while I was busy with everything in life. Thank you to everyone that filled in as well. It was a pleasure to listening to you all, but I'm back.
Well, finally, it's been a long time. We've missed you around here, Kevin, and great work on the World Cup. And I just have to say that for people that may not follow our soccer stuff, I have to say that it was a real twist last week that I joined you and Aaron Papernick on Canada FC on Sirius XM radio. So to be interviewed by you in a soccer context was a bit of a different twist. I know we've done it before in a slightly different way, but it was pretty cool to do it on the on live on the radio. So that was cool. But I'm glad you're back. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and there's a lot of stuff that obviously you missed and didn't miss, and there's still a lot of Formula One to come, which is going to be great. I mean, we're only halfway through the season.
August is almost over, which means the summer vacations for everyone involved in F1 is almost over. Just a few days left before the Belgian Grand Prix kicks off the second half of the season. But before we dive into F1 news, Mark, I want to send my thoughts and my good and well wishes to Robert Wickens and everyone at Schmidt-Peterson Motorsport in IndyCar. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about IndyCar probably in a few minutes when we get to Fernando Alonso. But for Robert Wickens, terrible accident. It was a terrible crash when he collided with Ryan Hunter-Reay and his car just flew right into the fence. And the fence is great to protect the fans that are watching the race. It's great to protect kind of the drivers, but it acts like a cheese grater, and it destroyed the car. The cell did its job, but a lot of injuries for Robert Wickens. He had a spine surgery yesterday, and we hope the best for the Canadian IndyCar driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's shocking to see that, and we just know that accidents are a part of motorsport, but when they're big ones like that, it really just makes your heart run cold, and your blood just really... It really chills you, and it's frightening to see. I mean, obviously, we're all happy that he's alive, and we just hope that the injuries that he has sustained he'll recover from as quickly as possible, and that he'll make a full and complete recovery. And obviously, at this point, the focus is on his health and not whether or not he'll be racing again. Hopefully, he will be. But obviously, first and foremost, we're all concerned about Robert Wickens' health, and that he'll be, like I say, healthy again very, very soon. But frightening. I don't know if you saw it, but another driver that we're very, very familiar here in Canada, Paul Tracy, was saying today on Instagram and other social media channels that he would like to see safety improved in different ways. And he basically said the same thing that you were doing, where that the fences are great for keeping cars in the tracks. But there's got to be a better way, because, my God, the way that car literally exploded into 1,000 tiny pieces or more. I mean, obviously, that is what the cars are designed to do, to help dissipate the energy of a big accident like that. But still, the way that he went airborne and over the safety barriers, which would have really helped dissipate that energy more, and probably would have made it still would have been a heavy impact, but the way that he took off and hit the fencing like that was just absolutely frightening, and something that thankfully we don't see very often. But still, that doesn't mean that changes should not be made.
Oval racing in an open wheel car is a dangerous way to live. Let's be honest here. Yep. But there's probably changes that could be done on the barriers, and there's the safer barriers aspect. But because of the nature of an oval, not the entire track usually is with the safer barriers, and it's kind of a happenstance. Today I was bike riding along the Circuit Villeneuve in Montreal here, and I stopped and I took a look at the safer barrier just to wrap my head around it too a bit. And I don't know what the solution is for oval. Maybe make the barriers a bit 2-3 feet higher so that you have less fans, maybe, or I don't know what the magic solution could be, but it's not the first time we've seen this. It probably won't be the last, and we kind of have to think, and when I say we, IndyCar has to take a look at what safety measures they could improve with this unfortunate accident.
Well, Kevin, it's interesting you should mention that because, of course, it's Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. We've seen some very big accidents over the years. Everybody remembers the big crash that Robert Kubica had in the Williams several years ago before coming down into the hairpin, and the way that his car launched into that little wing wall off of the side of the track, and then really, again, just exploded into a million tiny pieces, and Kubica basically barrel rolled down the track and across the track before coming to a rest against the safety wall on the other side of the track. And then even earlier this year at the Canadian Grand Prix, we saw how Lance Stroll and Brendan Hartley got squeezed up against together, and how Hartley's car got launched into the air. And fortunately, both of them were okay, and I think that was probably a pretty good indicator of why the halo in that incident is so important and adds an extra layer of safety for the drivers, because that had the potential to be a very nasty accident, rather than just both of them sort of shrugging their shoulders and walking away from that one. So definitely safety is something that has to be first and foremost and at the front, no matter in Formula One, IndyCar, endurance cars, whatever it is. The safety of the drivers and the spectators and everybody involved is the absolute priority.
Now that we've talked about the safety issue in IndyCar, it's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last time. IndyCar is one of those series where, because of the nature of the different tracks, because of the nature of the banking in certain oval, like Texas, like other places as well, you do have those unfortunate accidents happen more often than in other open wheel series. So we'll keep an eye on the health of Robert Wickens and maybe give a few updates when they come available to us. Now let's move to Formula One, Mark. A lot of news happened since the last time we talked. The biggest news of them all, Danny Ricciardo leaving Red Bull for Renault.
Isn't it just amazing, Kevin, when you kind of look at what they traditionally call the silly season, just how really silly it was this year? Because it really was hanging on a lot of things. Obviously, we knew that the deal for Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, it was going to get done. It just, I think it surprised a lot of people how long it was taking to get done. I don't think that it really... I know personally for myself, I expected it done before the Hungarian Grand Prix or German Grand Prix, whenever they announced it in the past month or so. And that was basically, once that was confirmed, it seemed like a no-brainer that they would pick up the option or give Valtteri Bottas a new deal, because he was out of a seat at the end of the year. And then, of course, the other big question, which is still unresolved at Ferrari, was Kimi Räikkönen. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute here. But those were really the two, I'd say, logical options if you're Daniel Ricciardo, because if you take the big three teams, obviously it's Mercedes, then Ferrari, and then Red Bull. So if you're Danny Ricciardo and the Red Bull, logically the only place you're going to go is up, and that either meant taking Raikkonen's seat or taking one of the Mercedes seats. And obviously that kind of got sorted out pretty quickly. And and I think it was interesting also some of the discussions that were kind of going around. And there was talk at one point that, or at least Zach Brown, the CEO of McLaren, said that they had serious talks with Ricciardo, which I find kind of interesting. And again, we'll get into the whole Alonso retiring from Formula One and leaving McLaren in a minute here. That it's on the list, and it's a big list this week.
It is.
Because honestly, I think that Alonso was kind of the last real claim I think that McLaren had to being sort of like a big team, if you want to call them that, considering how they've really slipped back and they haven't won a race now since 2012. If I'm correct.
I think so, off the top of my head. Yeah, I think it's 2012. Yeah, so it was almost 6 full seasons.
Yeah, so that always to me felt like a stretch. And then the only other logical one seemed, or I don't even know if it was logical, maybe the outside choice, which actually turned out to be the first choice, was Renault. because I think it just seemed to be a matter of time that they would just say that Carlos Sainz would not be coming back, because he's not even a Renault driver. He was just basically loaned to them in that whole really complicated situation that came up at the end of last year when McLaren broke the deal with Honda, and then Toro Rosso took the Honda engines and they gave their Renault engines to McLaren, and that whole complicated situation, and just how badly that relationship between Red Bull Racing and Renault went. I mean, talk about things kind of went, bad breakups. That's been a pretty bad breakup, because I mean, if you see what Cyril Abiteboul has been saying, that we've stopped listening to Christian Horner like years ago. So,
it's kind of crazy. Yeah,
you're a long time.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the way Renault reacted to this whole situation, and let's not underestimate the importance of Red Bull changing engine next year, going with Honda, with the decision of Danny Ricciardo to go to Renault. Maybe he's anticipating a dip in performance in Red Bull next year with the Honda engine. It has been more reliable with Toro Rosso than it has been with McLaren. The performances have not been too shabby with Toro Rosso when you regard the entirety of the car and the budget of that team. But can it take over Renault as an engine for Red Bull proper? That's the question. And if you're Danny Ricciardo, maybe he's thinking that this change of engine might give Red Bull, in a year or two of learning how to work with Honda. Because it's one thing for Toro Rosso to work with Honda. Who's the biggest entity in this? It's Honda, right? So Toro Rosso will probably follow the guidelines a bit more and learn to work with Honda. If you're Red Bull, you're going to demand performance out of Honda. And we've seen what happened the last time a team asked Honda for performance. Just ask Fernando Alonso and McLaren. It did not go well at all. So if I'm Danny Ricciardo, I'm expecting Red Bull to maybe have a dip in performance. So if I'm him and I see Renault having a position open, they have the money to pay me my true worth. That's not a problem. They have the budget, one of the highest budget in Formula 1, top 4 budget here, to maybe finally break through. And if you look at the 5-year plan they had, well, it's year number 4 next year. And it's getting close to the 5-year where they anticipate that they'll be competitive. So if I'm Danny Ricciardo, if I was thinking of doing that move maybe for 2020, might as well do now. Work out the last of the kinks of the car and the partnership of everything with this car. Learn to drive the Renault engine, which you already know in a way, and just progress with Renault until you are able to win races if they ever get there.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, Kevin, because I kind of see it as 6 as one, half dozen of the other, because obviously there's room for improvement in both of them. Obviously, the Honda engine has been the big question mark over the last several years since they rejoined Formula One, and we all know the problems that they had with Honda. With McLaren. That wasn't even up for debate, but I think that's out of the whole situation. I think that Red Bull had a very unique and privileged position to be able to review the engine data from both manufacturers, having the Honda engines in the Toro Rosso, which is their junior or their sister team, however you want to call it, and then having the Renault engines in the factory team in Red Bull Racing themselves. So, they've been able to compare apples with apples. It's not just going to be hearsay and just, people kind of passing on information or spying on each other, because we know this is Formula One. We know that happens, or just monitoring the progress of McLaren. So that was very fascinating. But I was reading in the August edition of Formula One Racing magazine that they reckon now that the Honda engine is only 30 horsepower off of the Mercedes. So the speculation, the question was that over, say, between this year and next year, will Honda be able to make more gains in improvement and, say, close that gap to, say, 15 or 20 horsepower? And if you get that close to the Mercedes power, the Mercedes car at that point, they've got this guy called Adrian Newey, and last time I heard, he's pretty good at designing cars. Obviously, chief technical officer at Red Bull Racing. And that was the speculation. If they can narrow that gap even closer in engine performance, do they have the edge on the design side that Newey can close that gap even better by designing a car that is better than the Mercedes. So then on the other side of that argument then is Renault, like you say, it's top 4 team, top team budget, loads of resources, and like you're saying, they're in year 4 of 5 of this program to get back to being competitive in Formula One. So I guess if you're Ricciardo, you're kind of really weighing which one's going to give me the best shot, and that kind of leads into another topic of discussion. And Christian Horner, the team principal at Red Bull Racing, says that he believed that Ricciardo's decision was in fact linked to his now former teammate Max Verstappen. And I think it's pretty obvious that Max is one for the future, and if he can ever really get his head screwed on straight, like he has over, I'd say since the Canadian Grand Prix at the beginning of June, Max has been very, very good compared to the start of the year up into the Monaco Grand Prix, to where Max was just
taking
really
out Ricciardo, literally. Just a few races this year, he took out his teammate, and those feelings do stay. The perception of the relationship between those two has always been that they'd agreed and they were kind of buddies, and it was all well and good, and roses are red and violets are blue, and we're going to get along and we're going to sing Kumbaya. But behind the scenes, after the first few incidents this year, it had to have gone down a bit, right? You kind of have to imagine that the Aussie temper of Danny Ricciardo probably overtook his Aussie happiness, and he wasn't probably happy with a few moves that Verstappen did do, and I guess that probably helped him take his decision.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, Kevin, if you even dial it back to a year ago, and I mean, by no means has Verstappen and Ricciardo reached any form or any kind of resemblance to the frosty and toxic nature of Hamilton and Nico Rosberg over the years.
True.
But last year, you have to go back to the Hungarian Grand Prix, where Max slid into Danny Ricciardo in turn 3 on the opening lap and knocked his teammate out. It was pretty tense, for at least by their standards at that point, and I think that they kind of recovered from that to a certain degree. But again, this year when they crashed at Baku and both of them went out, and that was, again, I think a renewal of that, and Max just was not doing, I don't think he was living up to a lot of the expectations that we have of him. I know he's still a young guy. I know he's still learning Formula One to a certain degree. I mean, even though he's in his 4th full season, I mean, he just didn't have the benefit of, say, some of these other guys, say even like Ricciardo himself, who didn't get into Formula One until he was in his early 20s. So, I mean, he's doing his learning all basically in real time while we're watching him. So it's been difficult, but to his credit, I mean, he's been able to turn it around. But I think that's sort of been the question, I mean, or the statements or the situation, if you will. I don't think they have a named number one, but I think the assumption is that just that Max is that guy that has, that some of those intangibles. He has that speed. He's got the aggressiveness. He's got that daring do. He's got all those things that a world champion should have. And it's just a question of, is it going to happen for him? It's just sort of putting them all together. And we've seen that over the past couple of races where mentally he's a lot more focused. And Ricciardo was saying at one point, well, I don't need to be the team number one at Red Bull. It would be nice, but it's not something I want. I don't really need it. So it is kind of interesting that even though he was saying right up until the Hungarian Grand Prix that he was ready to sign a new deal, he was ready to stay at Red Bull Racing and commit to them. So it was the big surprise, really. And even Helmut Marko said that it was a very strange saga. And Ricciardo obviously saying it's sad, but the time was right to leave Red Bull and make the move to Renault.
So before the August break, okay, the last Grand Prix, I forget off the top of my head the name, but before the last Grand Prix weekend, before the break, Marco talks to Ricciardo and like, okay, so we got the new contract here. You want to sign it? It's like, yes, I'm going to sign it. I'm going to sign it Tuesday. All right, go on vacation. Marco gets a phone call on Tuesday. I changed my mind. I'm going to Renault. So that was a bit of a change of situation and a bit of a weird way for it to all happen. I wonder what did Cyril Abitaboud, when he called Ricciardo, sweeten the pot with. I wonder what it was all about. Of course, Ricciardo becomes number one driver of Renault next year. It's not even a question. Hülkenberg's there, but Hülkenberg is there because of Decra and the Decra money, and he's there for that reason. Yes, he's a decent driver, and he's going to be able to not make the car look bad. I'm not going to say he's going to make it look good and change everything, but he doesn't make it look bad. So Ricciardo comes into this team as the number one driver with the entirety of the resources of Renault behind him.
Yeah. It's also interesting, Kevin, and I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, especially like at that Hungarian Grand Prix, where it kind of, I guess, it sort of unraveled, or I guess the decisions were made was Max Verstappen, of course, he drops out, his engine lets go, and he lets go a very profanity-laced tirade over the race radio. He apologized afterwards. But he's been sort of a little bit outspoken about the engines at times. So Christian Horner has been very outspoken and critical of Renault, not just this year, but basically going all the way back to 2014. But the only guy that's never really spoken up, I mean, he's talked about things, but he's never been overly critical, especially now not about Renault, was Danny Ricciardo. So maybe he had some criticisms in private, but in the public arena, at any rate, Danny Ricciardo has sort of really played his cards close to his chest, and obviously he didn't burn those bridges. And, well, I mean, if Renault are able to produce a more competitive car next year or the year after for him compared to the Red Bull, then that might prove to be a very, very good decision on Ricciardo's part, not to to be cautious and maybe political and not upset anybody at Renault. But, like you were saying, I think that, again, he is an upgrade, obviously, on Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg, I'd say he's in that sort of second tier of drivers in Formula One. I mean, he's a capable driver, but I don't think that he's really going to get as much out of that car that Ricciardo will. And I think that's one of the other things, too, because at Hungary, at the last race there before the summer break, we saw Kimi Räikkönen and his whole family there, his wife, his son. And the whole story behind that was, even though they haven't confirmed anything yet, is that they were trying to get a deal set up for Kimi to stay with Ferrari for next year, and speculation is perhaps even for the year after that. So, but there were some questions even about. Sorry, Kevin, I just want to say that even Vettel. I think was a little bit kind of wary about the possibility of Ricciardo joining Ferrari, because the 1 year they were together, Ricciardo did better than him. So given a good car, I think Ricciardo could do very, very well.
That's a good segue to talk about if Kimi Räikkönen is the right man for Ferrari. And according to a famous driver, my most favorite driver of all time, but I got a bit biased here. I'm from Montreal. From Quebec, Jacques Villeneuve, 1997 world champion. He mentioned that it would be a mistake for Ferrari to go with Leclerc and that Kimi Räikkönen should stay at Ferrari. But Mark, in the history of this show, especially the last 2 years, I've always talked this way about Kimi Räikkönen. Yes, he's fast, he's good, he's a good teammate, he helps you, he helps develop the car and all that. But for me, he always seems like he was missing the hunger. He was missing that little anger as well that you kind of need, and youthfulness in a way. Look what Verstappen did when he took over for Kvyat. He won Barcelona, yes, but then he continued to help and develop that car. And I think Ferrari, for them to truly bridge that little gap left still that they have versus the Mercs, I think they need that. And it's going to take time. There's going to be some growing pains. But if you think of making the change in 2020, there's going to be so much rule change between 2019 and 2020 as well, and 2021 after. Why not make it now and have Leclerc have to adapt and understand and discover Formula One, discover everything in a way that would benefit him in the long term? And Vettel's not going to stay at Ferrari for 20 years. And Leclerc, he's so young that he could be the guy who takes over after the guy. So if I'm Ferrari, as much as I hate to disagree with Jacques Villeneuve, and he has more experience than I have in a Formula One car, so let's make that clear. He knows more what he's talking about than I am. But if I'm Ferrari, I kind of have to favor Charles Leclerc. He's been so good with a terrible car this year. Of course, the car looks amazing, maybe the nicest looking car in the entire grid, but I have to say, maybe Ferrari needs to add a bit of youth and superstar power to a team that, yes, they're great, Vettel's great, it's Raikkonen, it's the same old, but a little bit of change sometimes helps move things along.
Yeah, the thing is with Kimi, it's almost like the safe choice, right? You kind of know what he's going to get. He's not going to really threaten Vettel because, Vettel is just that little bit faster than him. But, it's interesting. I think that the Hungarian Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago was the perfect example of how a team and a teammate should work, whether it was intentional or not. Once Lewis Hamilton was out in the lead there and Ferrari botched Sebastian Vettel's pit stop, and he came out just behind Valtteri Bottas. Bottas, I don't know if it was intentional, whether he was just lapping a little bit slower, or he was ordered by the team, or he just wasn't as fast as Sebastian Vettel. Whatever the case may have been, it worked ideally for Mercedes because he kept the two Ferraris at bay basically right until the very end. And by the time that Vettel was able to get around him, well, there were only a couple laps left in the race, and Lewis Hamilton was miles ahead on the track. I mean, that was going to be a thing regardless if Vettel was quicker than both Bottas and Lewis Hamilton. He just was not going to catch up and do it at that point with a couple of laps left. And of course, there's a whole thing with the trading paint with one another, and the whole sort of the controversy that surrounded that with Bottas and Vettel, and then Raikkonen as well. Or sorry, with Ricardo. I mean, obviously Bottas. I'm getting my fins mixed up here, Kevin. It's first week back from summer break, and I'm just come back from my holiday as well. So
Raikkonen, the Ferrari finish driver.
But the point is that Bottas did exactly what he needed to do. He really provided that buffer between Hamilton and the Ferraris to let Lewis just do what he needed to do while slowing down the two Scarlet Ferraris and just basically running interference to the point that it didn't really matter if they got in front of them. They'd pick up extra points in the World Championship. But the thing was, by that point, they weren't going to challenge for the top step on the podium. They weren't going to challenge for the win. And that's the thing that we've seen not just in the race, but also in qualifying. And sometimes Kimi, he has that one little moment in qualifying and just can't really do the same thing, sort of run that interference and kind of shake up the order a little bit and back up his teammate, because there's quite often, you see Vettel mixed up there with the two Mercedes, and you really need that second Ferrari in there to really be effective. So whether or not, Leclerc would be the guy to do it. I mean, and let's be honest here. I mean, what he's done in that Sauber this year, obviously not one of the best cars in Formula One, is absolutely amazing. I mean, I know the last couple of races hasn't been quite as good for Leclerc as, say, maybe the previous several. I mean, maybe even going back all the way to the beginning of the year. But the thing is, I mean, he's consistently outperformed his teammate, outqualified him, and he's made it into Q3. He's into the top 10. He's really punching above his weight in a car, and he really doesn't have any business to be there. I mean, the difference between him and Marcus Ericsson is night and day. So, I mean, obviously he's able to exact that much performance out of a car that has its issues. And so given a really good car like a Red Bull or a Ferrari or a Mercedes, who knows what this guy could do. The thing is, you're going from a smaller environment at Sauber, where maybe you're protected and then maybe nurtured to a certain degree, to being under the microscope in one of the biggest and the pressure of not just one of the biggest teams in Formula One, but one of the biggest teams in motorsport anywhere in the entire world. So is that timing just right for Leclerc to make that jump? Because, I mean, honestly, Ferrari's never given young drivers like him a shot. So where is that trade-off? Do you give him one more year at Sauber? Do you give Kimi one more year to have like a final farewell tour? Or do you just, like you say, just, like what with the changes that are coming gradually over the next 2 years and then the complete sea change for 2021 and beyond, do you just sort of pull the Band-Aid off and just get it over with now? So that's obviously a big decision that Ferrari is going to have to make. And of course, there is a bit of vacuum at Ferrari because unfortunately Sergio Marchionne passed away several weeks ago. So they had to enact that succession plan. So that was really unexpected. So I think that whatever they're going to do, I think that I think that Marchionni had that presence, and he had that force to get things done and get it done to his satisfaction. And I think just in the whole aftermath of his passing, I get the feeling that they're just being a little bit more cautious, and they're going to make the right move. It just might not be as quick as that we might have seen under Sergio.
Sergio Marchionni was very conservative, though, as well, with his decision. So maybe now is the time. There's a saying in French that goes this way. I'll say it in French and I'll say it in English after. Qui risque rien n'a rien. Who risks nothing gets nothing. And is Ferrari really happy playing second fiddle to Lewis Hamilton over the last 4 years? And is there any way that's going to change this year? Probably not. You kind of have to throw a monkey in the wrench. And maybe Vettel gets a bit complacent too. And maybe you need to shake him up too. What if he finishes second in FP1 and FP2 because Leclerc is a bit faster? Could be totally the opposite too. But if you don't risk it, if you don't try it, guess what? You're not going to know. And the beauty of this sport is, if it doesn't work out, we've seen worse things happen. You pull a Kvyat, you send him back to Sauber, and you bring back Raikkonen or something. That can always happen. But if you don't give the driver a chance, you'll never know. And the last young driver that was given a chance in Formula One before people were thinking that he's ready is Max Verstappen. And look where he is now. 2 wins, podiums later, great performances all around, majority of the time. So maybe we are moving away from the old veteran driver. And if you look at the landscape of the entire driver peloton, there's some good young drivers out there. And you know, it's all well and good to talk about them as the futures, but if you don't want Leclerc to become a Pascal Verheyen and just disappear off the face of the earth, you have to give him a shot. And now, as good as any time.
Yeah, and Kevin, just before we take a quick break here, I just want to make the point that Daniel Ricciardo was saying not so long ago, that having a strong teammate like a Verstappen really pushes you to be better. And I think that Vettel naturally is just that little bit faster than Kimi Räikkönen without really having to push himself even further. And like I was saying earlier, we saw at Red Bull Racing in 2014 that Ricciardo was better than Vettel. I mean, there's all those there's other side things too, that he knew he was going to Ferrari after the end of that year. He'd already won 4 world championships, so maybe he was to a certain degree maybe going through the motions. But the thing is, what would it be like if he had a guy that was closer to him to push him and just motivate him a little bit more? Because obviously I think that Verstappen and Ricciardo were better than Hamilton and Rosberg. I mean, Rosberg obviously not quite as quick as Lewis Hamilton. Not very many people are, but was able to outperform Lewis on occasion, was able to push himself to try and match Hamilton as best he could. And I think that's one thing that's benefited Red Bull. And I mean, you see over the years, the past couple of years, just how things have gone back and forth, and how they've been able to score wins and podiums at Red Bull between Verstappen and Ricciardo. That isn't maybe expected all the time. And I think that what they've lacked maybe in the power of the Renault engine, they've made for with some of the other things like the performance and the handling of the car itself. And then just the drivers, 2 very good drivers in Max Verstappen and Danny Ricciardo, pushing each other, or at least feeding off of the other guy, and just that motivating them to be faster, to be better, and just, hey, I want to beat that guy that's sitting across from me in the garage. So I think that maybe Ferrari could do that, because I've been thinking that just based on the consistency this year, that even though it's been swinging back between Mercedes and Ferrari and occasionally Red Bull, that just in the bigger picture, that Lewis Hamilton has just been more consistent than Sebastian Vettel. You think about Vettel's lunge at turn 1 at Baku, that didn't stick and dropped him back, so he lost points there. And then more recently, for example, just to use a couple here, is when he slid off into the gravel at the German Grand Prix while leading. And you look at the result there, and then in Hungary, and what had been a slight advantage in the World Championship for Sebastian Vettel over the course of 2 short races, literally back to back, reversed and has now been opened up into what is started to be a fairly comfortable gap at the top for Lewis Hamilton. I mean, obviously there's a lot of races to go, but still, it's amazing how things can change quickly. But maybe that's what Vettel needs, is just another guy there to really just push him a little bit more, and by virtue of that, just push Ferrari a little bit more and become more of a consistent double threat to Mercedes-Benz.
Yep, exactly. So we'll see what happens with this. But how about a little word from our very great and generous sponsor?
Yes, today's show is being sponsored by Formula One. Not Formula One, but Codemasters, the developers of the official Formula One video game, F1 2018. It is available to buy starting on August 24th, and it's available now for pre-order at formula1game.com. And that's available on all your favorite platforms, including Xbox One, PS4, PC, DVD-ROM, and Steam games. And it is absolutely amazing. I've been playing it for the past week or so. It's amazing. The previous versions have been outstanding, but this one is even better. So basically, you get to live the life of a Formula One driver. There's pressure to perform on the track and also off it, dealing with the media, your team, and even more. You get to manage your ERS, be your own mechanic, and it's really cool. The data, the handling in the cars for this year is upgraded and improved. And get this, it's really cool. The handling for the cars in this year's game is based on real-life Formula One data. And there are also team-specific upgrades. And this year, really cool, they're bringing back all 12 of the classics from F1 2017. And there's going to be 20 classic F1 cars this year, including the 2009 Braun BGP 001, the 2003 Williams FW25, and my favorite, if you guys are fans of Niki Lauda and James Hunt, and you want to have your own version of Rush, this year's version, F1 2018, includes the Ferrari 312 T2 and the McLaren M23D. So go back, a flashback or a throwback to 1976. So it's absolutely wonderful. So it's also multiplayer features are new and improved for this year. It has a new F1-inspired super license system, which promotes clean, fair, and competitive online racing and improved matchmaking, which matches you up with other players of comparable skills. So, guys, highly recommended. Get in there, pre-order your copy of Formula One 2018 online now at formula1game.com, or buy it on Friday, August 24th on Xbox One, PS4, PC, DVD-ROM, or on Steam. And if you want to go check it out, head on over to formula1game.com. Lots of previews, lots of screenshots, and if you haven't played it, and unfortunately not very many people have, I can say it's absolutely fantastic, so go check it out. And
the reviews, by the way, Mark, the reviews are out, and it's probably the best F1 game ever. And I'm going to have the chance to play it in the next few days. I'll take my steering wheel and all my setup out of storage, and I'm going to start driving F1 2018. And I'm probably going to make a few videos, too, because one thing with the brand new studio is I can record myself playing. So you'll be able to see me drive and see the result on your screen. Kevin testing F1 2018. And, it's great to have the classic cars, and it's great to have the handling too. That's going to be fun. We've talked about this before last year too, when I was playing Project Cars, the original one, not the second version. I was playing Project Cars, and I was playing F1 2017, 2016. So it's going to be a great way to compare. And the data on Project Cars were made from the data they had available in 2014, 2015. But the upgraded version for F1 2018, I really can't wait.
Yeah, and Kevin, just a word, just aside here, man to man, make sure that you plan plenty of time, and just to make sure that things, you don't try to encroach on any time with your fiance, because it is addictive. The game is that good. You're not going to just sit down for half an hour. I mean, you're going to sit down and play this. I would say at least minimum half-day blocks. So I'm just warning you. So big thanks to Codemasters and Formula One 2018, the official game of Formula One, for sponsoring the show. And Kevin, back to the topic at hand. I mean, I'd say pretty much about 3/4 of the way of one of our usual shows, and I don't know if we're even halfway through the list of topics we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But we've only barely touched on it. I mean, it's been all Ricardo and just some of the big topics in the drivers market so far. But also, one of the other moves that is maybe not a big surprise and shouldn't be for people that have been watching Formula One and also World Endurance Cars is the announcement made by Fernando Alonso, the double world champion, that he's to retire for Formula One at the end of the season. So he's obviously given up his seat at McLaren. And what I find absolutely fascinating, Kevin, is literally hours after the official announcement came the news that, Fernando's leaving the door open after 2019 to come back to Formula One if McLaren is competitive.
Yeah, it's just trying to make sure that he gets all his duck in a row just in case. But, I don't think it's going to happen. I think Fernando Alonso is done with Formula One. And one of the big reasons for Fernando Alonso to take that decision is the lack of action on the track, the lack of overtaking, the lack of his talent showing through the result of a car. Because of the lack of performance, the lack of reliability, and the lack of know-how, to be quite honest, with McLaren over the last few years, his talent has not shown through. And just go back to the Indy 500 last year. Fernando Alonso discovered that, you know what? The car is okay. The cars are all similar, but my talent does shine here. So, let's face it. There's a very high probability that the 2019 season, Fernando Alonso does a full-time IndyCar calendar.
Yeah, and it's not really a real surprise. And, I mean, Fernando can say some of these things that it wasn't, he didn't want to stay because of the lack of spectacle and all those things, or track action or whatever it was. But the writing was on the wall, and the writing's been on the wall ever since, like you say, Indianapolis 2017. I mean, he wanted that shot at the triple crown of motor racing, being Monaco, being the Indy 500, and being Le Mans. He gave the first crack at Indy, and that didn't work out. Unfortunately, his engine let go, ironically, towards the latter stage.
It was a Honda engine too, just to make sure that you twist the knife really carefully,
Yeah, exactly right. So it had to work out that way, of course. But then this year, he goes and races for Toyota in endurance cars. They win Le Mans, and I think from then it was just a matter of when is he going to make the announcement and then make a serious crack at winning the Indy 500 and win that triple crown. I mean, he'd be the only guy since Graham Hill to actually do it. I mean, a lot of guys have got 2 out of the 3 legs. I mean, Jacques Villeneuve, of course, has won in Monaco. He's won the Indy 500 several times.
And he finished second in Le Mans. So with Ricardo Zonta back a few, 10 years ago maybe or something?
Something like that, yeah. So, I mean, that's obviously Fernando's big thing, right? I mean, Sean Bratch is the commercial director at Formula One, the governing body, or the managing arm of Formula One, said that Fernando was right to say that. But I mean, to say solely that was the reason why he was going to leave Formula One seems like a little bit of a parting shot, and I think even more so because earlier this spring or earlier this summer, Ross Brawn in Formula One pushed through those aerodynamic changes to the front wings to help increase overtaking for next year. And of course, and surprisingly, I talked about it in the last episode, just how there seems to be this unheard of teamwork between the teams in the paddocks to really form this vision and these regulations for post 2020. Which is unheard of. So it's not like, I mean, it's okay to say the lack of spectacle or lack of action up to this point. Absolutely. I totally agree with them. I mean, some of the races that we've seen, Monaco this year, if it wasn't for Ricardo having that problem with his MGUK, then it would have been even worse. But I mean, that was just, I think, one of the highlights for that just prove how bad it can be. But they have been trying to correct that, and under Liberty Media, they're trying to do things that are just unheard of. That Bernie Ecclestone previously either didn't want to or was just unwilling to, or didn't, whatever the case was, to make those changes. So to suggest that that's the whole reason that's, to leave, yeah, that's not really so much of it, because it will be addressed. Whether they get it right, well, we'll find out next year and the years thereafter. But the move is there, and the fact that everybody seems to be working together for this common good is very encouraging. And Fernando, it's just really interesting, because there were other comments coming out before he made the announcement. Christian Horner said that Red Bull wouldn't try to sign him because he causes quote unquote chaos wherever he goes. And unfortunately,
right? Because he calls it like he sees it. Doesn't mean it's always right, but he calls it like he sees it. And Mark, we're not surprised by this decision, just because we hear him quite often on race radio, and it's never really you don't hear a guy who actually likes what he's doing, do you? Like he's not feeling like he's enjoying driving those cars. And at the point where he is in his career, if you don't like what you're doing, guess what? It's time for a change.
It's time for a change. And that's true, right? And I think ultimately, that Alonso's legacy in Formula One is going to be quite mixed. I mean, obviously, there is no question that he is one of the best drivers ever, talent-wise. But, there was some comments in 1979 world champion Jody Scheckter said the other day that he thinks that Alonso is overrated. He said talent-wise, he's a great driver, but he disagreed with the comments that Felipe Massa said that he considers Alonso as good as Michael Schumacher. Well,
no.
Okay, two world championships that Alonso got, obviously a fantastic achievement. I mean, most guys in Formula One never even get one, let alone two. But to compare him to Michael Schumacher in 7, I mean, Michael Schumacher is one of the best of all time, and obviously he's the most winningest driver from a championship point of view of all time. And I agree with Scheckter. I think that's in that point of view, he is somewhat overrated. Talent-wise, I think he is as quick and as talented as any other guy that's ever driven Formula One, and he deserves to be mentioned in that conversation.
But it's not about the talent, it's about the poor decision-making skills that Fernando Alonso has had over the last decade, right? It all started, he leaves McLaren wins, start winning. Then he goes to Ferrari, wanted to win again, and then they stop winning. And so it's all about poor decision and poor timing for Fernando Alonso, unfortunately. And look, we're in a different world of drivers now, that if you have a name, and if Alonso goes to IndyCar in 2019, it's going to be the red carpet. They're going to welcome him with open arms like they did last year, and he's going to have the budget to keep up, because it's not necessarily as much as a Formula One. But if you're McLaren, I'm happy about the decision too. You know why? You don't have to pay a 7-digit contract to a driver, and you can take that money, invest it in the car, and maybe make yourselves better. So it might be a win-win situation for both McLaren and Alonso.
Yeah, and I think it's a good move for McLaren as well, because, like you say, it opens up a lot of money, and I think it's interesting too that they're giving a shot to Carlos Sainz, because there was quite a bit of discussion before the whole Ricciardo thing working out at Renault. Obviously, like I was saying earlier, Sainz was going to be on his way out, obviously, because of that relationship he has with Red Bull Racing, and there was talk that maybe Ocon was going to go from Force India to Renault. And honestly, I didn't really see or predict that Sainz would end up at McLaren. Although I didn't predict that Ricciardo was going to go to Renault either. So what do I know? But I think it's interesting, and I think that it's a good move for both of them. I think that Sainz hasn't really had a chance to really, I think, I don't know, prove what he can do in Formula One. Obviously, he had his time at Toro Rosso. And Toro Rosso, obviously, you're never going to be at the front of the grid. And he'd even said like a couple of years ago that by in a couple of years I want to be racing for one of the top teams. And the move to Renault, I think, I think it's I don't know, it's almost like a lateral move for him.
Yeah, I was gonna say lateral, or maybe like a northeast move, where it's like it's lateral, maybe a bit forward, but more lateral than forward. And we'll see how it works with McLaren, and that if the McLaren-Renault partnership continues to go, and it can only go up from here, and maybe Sainz is the guy that saw... Here's another aspect to it, the technical aspect to it. He was with Renault, and you've seen this engine, and you've seen other components that McLaren do use in a different way, with a different chassis, with a different setup. So maybe knowing the ins and outs of that engine goes to McLaren and can tweak it a little bit, find ways that he discovered with Renault, and maybe bridge the communication gap between those two as well. So, no, it could be beneficial, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Sainz more performant at McLaren than Alonso was over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously was never really going to happen at Toro Rosso, because that's more of a development team. And then this year at Renault, he was always going to be playing second fiddle to Nico Hülkenberg, because A, he's not a Renault driver, and B, he doesn't have the experience in Formula One as, say, Nico Hülkenberg has. So he was never really, I think, going to get I don't know, his fair shot, or really maybe maximize the potential at Renault. It was probably a good experience for him, but I think being a McLaren guy and being there, with several years experience, I think it could work out nicely.
And he becomes number one driver too, right? It's not going to be Van Dorn, the number one driver, never mind if he's just going to be there. No, I think that's already done. But, it's not going to be Stoffel Van Dorn, who's number one driver at McLaren. It is Carlos Sainz, and it's a bit of a new beginning. And now they don't have to manage the ego of Fernando Alonso. When you think about Zach Brown of the last 2 years, what do you think about? Him trying to soften up the comments of Alonso. He doesn't have to do that now. He can focus on being the CEO of McLaren.
God, that just sounds exhausting thinking about it. Having to deal with a personality and an ego as big as Fernando Alonso's. I think that if you're Zach Brown, I think you're just looking forward to getting this car right, getting back, moving up the grid, and being more competitive. So I know that they love, or at least publicly, they say that they love Alonso with McLaren. But I think that even if he doesn't come out and say it, I mean, it's got to be a big weight off of his shoulders not to have to manage that. But, moving across the grid now away from McLaren, Pierre Gasly has been confirmed making, obviously, what is not a lateral nor a northeast move, moving all the way up from Toro Rosso up to Red Bull Racing for 2019, getting Danny Ricciardo's seats. And again, a very young driver lineup with Max Verstappen and Pierre Gasly. Gasly's been getting a lot of accolades and a lot of praise from the brass at Red Bull Racing, saying he's now a fully mature Formula One driver. And obviously, his season's been a little bit up and down. I mean, he was extremely impressive at Bahrain earlier this year, where he managed a P4 in the Toro Rosso. That wasn't really a fluke, because, I mean, he had the speed all weekend long, and it's been a little bit up and down ever since. But I think he's obviously another guy that's got a load of talent, and it'll be interesting to see how he mixes with Max Verstappen, and see how he matches up against him mano a mano, and just to see who's got the speed, who's quicker. So it's going to be fun to watch, and it's really kind of cool to see how things have been moving around. And then Sergio Perez, who sued his team, which kind of kicked off a whole chain of events. Well, he didn't really sue his team, but I guess it was all part of move to help really get the team into administration. And then get those blocks or those stepping stones in place for Lawrence Stroll and his consortium to buy Force India, which is, I guess, the next thing. Does that mean that Stroll Jr.?
Exactly. I was going to say, Perez is close to extending with Force India. And where is Ocon going to go? Because if they have a choice, Lawrence Stroll, new owner, part of the ownership group of Force India, is probably going to say, yeah, give my kid the ride.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I mean, does he stay at Williams? Does Lawrence Stroll find a way to bring him over to the team that he and his partners have bought? And honestly, if I'm Esteban Ocon, I'm feeling a little bit worried about where I'm going to be next year, because I mean he's obviously a young guy as well that's got plenty of talents, but the musical chairs of Formula One seats is starting to fill up fairly quickly here.
Yeah. Here's my prediction.
Makes you wonder.
Mark, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, Sorry for my prediction here, but look, Williams, it's a tire fire. Let's be quite honest here. It's been
Put it mildly, yeah.
Yeah, it's been terrible. Sirotkin is not good. He should not be back. We'll see if it's because he's bringing the money or not. But if progression in the future with the new brass of Williams, because there was a reshuffling a few weeks ago, and there's going to be some analysis in the offseason to probably bring a new front office to Williams in next year. Look, Ocon's going to be available, so why not? And there's another driver that knows the engine quite well that is available right now, Pascal Wehrlein. How about Esteban Ocon, Pascal Wehrlein, the Williams driver lineup for 2019? That would be an upgrade in my mind to 2018. Sorry, Lance, I love you. I'm wearing your shirt right now. But still, I think this driver lineup could be beneficial for Williams next year. If it happens, it could happen. But if you're looking at drivers available, those are two drivers that could be available and that have the relationship with Williams. Esteban Ocon, Force India, guess what engine they're using? And if you're looking at Pascal Wehrlein, reserve driver for the Mercs, look what engine he's using. And yes, those two moves could be possible.
Yep. So, I mean, silly season has been fascinating over the past couple of weeks. And, you know, Kevin, I don't remember an eventful summer break in the past, well, in recent memory, at any rate, that we've seen over the past 2.5 or 3 weeks, ever since the end of the Hungarian Grand Prix. And it's definitely not done yet. You know, there's still other things coming out, news that's sort of been percolating up to the surface over the past couple of days that, it's looking good for the German Grand Prix for 2019. I mean, Hockenheim was very well attended this year. It was great to see so many people attending the race there. And then there's even some fresh concerns about Monza because ticket sales are way down, and they just managed to save that Grand Prix only in the past couple of years. So when it looked like Bernie Ecclestone was really going to hold them to it and really try, and he was prepared to walk away and have I find it unthinkable to have Formula One without a Grand Prix at Monza, which is basically the spiritual home of Ferrari and the Tifosi. But so that's one we're going to wait and see. Miami is still up in the air whether or not they're going to go to have the Grand Prix there.
Oh, Miami. Nothing ever happens there. They keep announcing sporting events in Miami, and it never happens. Yes, I'm referring to a soccer team that's supposed to happen, and we'll never know.
Ask David Beckham how easy it is to get pro sports or a big league sporting event arranged in Miami, because my other podcast from the back line, that was one of the very first topics we talked about when our first show went to air back in the fall of 2013, so almost 5 years ago. And it took almost that long to get that franchise to Miami for David Beckham, and it still doesn't even seem it's a certainty now. What with the land for the stadium and whatnot. So I don't think regardless of Stephen Ross is involved and all the power and the abilities that he has to get that done, it's not by no means an easy thing to get sorted out, and it's by no means going to be done anytime soon, based on previous history.
No, exactly. So we'll keep an eye on this. We'll keep an eye on the next few weeks of news to come back next week with a review. But before we end the show, interesting remarks by Renault that says standard parts for Formula One, because it's one of the ideas that Liberty Media and the head honchos of Formula One have to maybe level the playing field a bit, to have some standard parts or a standard engine or other. They say that Renault mentions that it could allow for Formula One engine cheating. And, well, to get a bit of the essence of this belief from Renault, just don't go too far. Just cross the pond, go to North America, and look at the two most popular race leagues that you have in North America, which is NASCAR and IndyCar. There's a big disparity of popularity between the two, yes, but those two have a similar way of dealing with competitiveness, where there's not that much change between the cars, and it's more how you handle the pieces that you're allowed to have. And they have rules. Some weeks something is legal, the week after it's not, and there's a lot of gray areas, and that gray area is what Renault is worried about. That if you have standard parts, what can you do to those parts? What can't you do to those parts? How can you affect those parts? Can become a bit engine cheating, and that's a fear that Renault has if Liberty Media and the teams go in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there was a bit of a controversy earlier in the year that Ferrari was somehow getting around the rules with some of the parts that they had on their engine. So maybe that is an answer. And, honestly, it's a bit of a struggle for me because I see some of the sense in having some of these standardized parts, say brakes, for example, that would make a lot of sense because, let the teams or the manufacturers build what's to their expertise, right? So let them design the chassis, let them design the engine, but brakes and things like that, who really cares? It's just give them all the same brakes and then let them try and exact the advantages in other areas. Obviously, chassis and engine, gearboxes, those are the big ones. So obviously, if they were to put standardized parts on the engine, how would that affect that ability for the different engine manufacturers like Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault, Honda to build that competitive engine? So maybe that is a partial answer to it. If you have these so many standard parts that everybody's using, regardless if you have a Mercedes or a Ferrari engine, it's the ingenuity and the engineering and the application of the knowledge and to be able to develop the engine to make yours just that much more powerful or get that much more horsepower out of it compared to that Honda engine or whatever it might be. So I think it's interesting. I think I'm not against the idea of standardized parts. I'd have to see maybe how they propose to do it, but I think it's an interesting concept that Renault is putting out there.
Why waste resources and research and development time and money on parts that don't necessarily affect the performance and that can just make you worse maybe against your competitors? And the fear of Renault on that aspect comes where they don't want to lose their advantage. And that's a very selfish way to look at it. It's just Renault or just Ferrari or just the Mercs or just another team that has an advantage over another that's just saying, look, I don't want things to change because I got an advantage. Well, we live in an ever-evolving world. And the advantage that you do have is experience and knowledge and know-how and manpower. That will not change even if you have standard parts. Just the way you use that know-how, that manpower, and those resources to your advantage will change. So it's a bit of a fear of change in my mind and not necessarily a fear of cheating. So we'll see where Liberty Media and Formula One management takes those ruling and where the team association takes it as well. And I think it's all related, and this is all to trying to direct the narrative of where the rules should go, and it's a ploy by Renault and their associates on the grid, so basically everyone that has a Renault engine, to back this statement in a way that, look, we don't want to lose our advantage, basically. Well, guess what? It always happens, and every time there's a big switch of rules every 5-6 years, there's a change of hierarchy in Formula One. And if you're Renault, how about you embrace it and you're trying to be the one team that does make the most amount of change and goes on top of that hierarchy after the rule change? That's how I would look at it. That's how I would approach it, and not necessarily be afraid of it, but embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. And Kevin, I think just before we wrap it up here, we can just maybe refresh all of our collective memories here with the standings in the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. And we'll start over on the driver's side, going into the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps this weekend, one of my favorite circuits. It's still Lewis Hamilton on top of the Drivers' Championship with 213 points, 24 points, almost a race win, ahead of Sebastian Vettel with 189. Kimi Räikkönen sneaking up on his teammate a little bit, third place, 146 points. followed by Valtteri Bottas with 132. And then you have Danny Ricciardo and Max Verstappen rounding out the top 6. Danny Ricciardo with 118 points, Max Verstappen with 105. And then moving over to the Constructors' Championship, of course, it is just between Mercedes and Ferrari, very tight in the Constructors at the moment. Mercedes leading the way with 345 points, only 10 points ahead of the Scuderia with 335. Red Bull Racing in third place with 223. And then it's a long way back to Renault in fourth place. And they have a mighty total of 82 points. So there you go, Kevin. Exciting. Looking forward to getting back to racing this weekend. And, you know, I almost hate it a little bit once you get that summer break out of the way, because I always find that second half of the season goes a lot faster than the first half. But, hey, we're back to racing. I guess that's all that really matters.
Back to racing. Lights are off, and it's time to go. Thank you, Mark, for your time tonight. It was really fun to be back.
Yeah, it's great. It feels just like old times, and it's been a lot of fun. Like I say, it was cool to do Sirius XM radio together, like on opposite sides of the mic, but very cool to get back and talk Formula One, both of us. It seems like it's been a very long time.
And thanks to Codemasters as well, developers of Formula One 2018. F1 2018 will be available August 24th at f1game.com and anywhere you get your video games, Steam, PS4, Xbox One, and online on DVD-ROM as well. And until next time, for Mark Dailey, I'm Kevin Laramee. Thank you all for staying with Mark and all the co-hosts that filled in for me over the last few months. We really appreciate it. I'm back. I appreciate talking F1, and I miss you all. And we'll see each other next week. And until then, have a great Formula One.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.